Let's introduce you to Benedict Spence, who's a journalist and broadcaster who's joining me all this morning. And we'll also be talking to Dr. Simon Clarke, Associate Professor in Cellular Microbiology at Reading University. First up to you, Dr. Simon Clarke, and we'll get to Benedict's thoughts on this story in just a few moments. The extraordinary situation we've got involving the AstraZeneca vaccine, where we have got 6 countries, huge number of countries, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Ireland, Holland and others, expressing so much concern over the AstraZeneca vaccine and the risk of blood clots to those who have had it, that despite their own European medical agencies saying it is safe, despite the World Health Organization saying it is safe, they have decided to suspend, as they say, a precautionary measure, the giving of the AstraZeneca vaccine over concerns about the risk of blood clots. What do you make of this decision?
What I make of it is that it's all a bit odd. I'm not entirely sure why they've done it. There is the suggestion that it's because of an increased risk of blood clots, a special type of blood clot that occurs in some vessels in the brain. Although my reading of things is that actually there is no difference. I think they need to be a little bit more forthcoming with their satisfactory explanation for why they've done this. Because of
Yes, no, I think this goes back, does it not, to when we had Macron and Merkel saying, well, they don't want this vaccine to be given out to French and German people over 65 because it only had 8% efficacy. And that was genuinely just down to their own supposed experts and scientists misreading some data. I mean, genuinely. Just think it was only 8% of those involved in the trial had been over 65, as opposed to it only had 8% effectiveness. I mean, this is pretty basic stuff, for goodness sake. There are some big question marks for a lot of people about taking a vaccine which has been developed so quickly. We know that vaccines normally take years to develop, and a lot of people are expressing concern ahead of both Pfizer and AstraZeneca being given approval, that they hadn't gone through the safety protocols that a normal vaccine would go through. But that isn't true, is it?
No, it's not true at all. They weren't necessarily done in sequence like they normally would be. They were done in parallel. I don't really see that as a problem at all. That the tests, the right questions were answered and the right tests were carried out. So the fact that, if you like, we sort of concertinaed it up a bit. Shouldn't really make any difference.
And we have seen 17 million doses of the AstraZeneca jab given out across Europe. And we are talking about a handful, quite literally a handful of cases where there have been blood clots. But it's been pointed out also that the Pfizer vaccine has exactly the same level of reported blood clots as in the aftermath of someone having a vaccine. And again, correlation and causation, not the same thing.
Yeah.
But also the small point that during the AstraZeneca trials, the people who had the placebo had a higher rate of blood clot than the people who had the actual AstraZeneca jab. And added to that, that actually you've got a higher risk of blood clots if you get COVID. Putting that all in together, how can it be a precautionary measure to suspend use of this vaccine?
I don't see how they can justify it at all. You're quite right. People get blood clots, and really, the number of people who have blood clots in an unvaccinated population appears to be no different from the population who have been vaccinated. And certainly, you're quite right to say as well that extensive blood clotting is a feature of COVID disease. So while they're worrying about people's tiny chances, it seems, if there's any chance at all, of increased risk of these blood clots, they're leaving people exposed to the virus and the extensive blood clotting that can happen from that. So really, I think they could be argued to be fiddling while Rome burns.
Well, indeed. We're told some countries here, like Austria, have halted the use of certain batches of the drug as a precautionary measure.
Yeah.
It's 11 countries in total across Europe that have suspended. We're told for a couple of days while they look into it, even though, of course, their own European Medicines Agency has said that they do not have any concerns. And again, they have been looking at this and they don't have concerns. Yeah. Why do you think that all these concerns have been raised about the AstraZeneca vaccine? There's just been nothing like the same issues raised about Pfizer, whether it's Emmanuel Macron and Angela Merkel, two of the most powerful people in Europe, saying that it wasn't suitable for over 65s, expressing concern about safety. The battles over getting supplies of AstraZeneca vaccine, the battles over the export of the vaccine from Italy to Australia. They seem to be desperate to get hold of the vaccine, to stop the vaccine going out of Europe, but they don't want anyone to take it. What's going on?
It's very strange, isn't it? And one is tempted to conclude that there is the possibility of the green-eyed monster, because, of course, the UK has produced, in a relatively short space of time, a successful, safe vaccine, and other countries' efforts have not been quite so effective. Of course, none of us knows, but it's a tempting conclusion to come to, isn't it?
But this is it. I mean, a lot of us like to think of scientists and medics as being somehow above the political fray, above. Your laugh, I think, tells us an awful lot there. But also this idea that it's not about ego, and as you say, the green-eyed monster, and that that this is just about the good of our fellow man. But scientists and medics and regulators and politicians, they're all human beings, aren't they? Do you think there is genuinely an aspect here where, if AstraZeneca had been developed in France, was made by France or Germany, that we would be having any of these issues?
I think that these people are just as prone to avarice as anybody else. So when I was an undergraduate, my tutor used to say, "Beware aged professors nearing retirement," and I think it was the best piece of advice I ever got from him.
Dr. Simon Clarke, Associate Professor in Cellular Microbiology at Reading University. Thank you very much indeed. Benedict Spence, listening to that. I thought the laugh said it all, didn't it? We do like to think of the decisions made in the areas of medicine and science, and again with SAGE and the advisors to the government here. We like to think of them as being, say, different from us, above the raw emotion and personal and petty jealousies and the like that rule a lot of other decisions in our lives. But this would suggest clearly not.
Absolutely not. But I've never understood it. It's the same with lawyers, and it's the same with economists. We seem to think that they have this sort of almost ethereal quality that puts them up ahead of the rest of us. But we all went to school with these people. We can remember that they were just like us. And frankly, when you put it in that context, I think you trust their ability to make these decisions a lot less, given that you think actually they're a person just like me, and possibly even worse than me.
I'm just thinking of, didn't everyone at university know someone called Paul the Medic? I remember Paul the Medic. I think Paul, if you listen, I think Paul the Medic became a gynecologist. Not a chance, mate. Not a chance that I go to see that guy. Not a chance. But I do think there is something, and I'm the daughter of a GP. I'm very much been raised to trust science, to trust medics. I have lost a lot of trust in scientists and doctors over the last year in terms of the advice we've been having on SAGE. Of course, not everyone on SAGE. In fact, virtually none of them are virologists. They have lots of other different areas of expertise, but they are perhaps they're set. I don't trust them to be in charge of making political decisions, because they're not there to weigh up the issues of freedom and the economy. That's not their area. But this thing we do like to think, when it comes to will this save life, will this not save life, that the medics and the scientists will make the right decision, and the politicians, in terms of rolling out a vaccine. But given that so many European leaders, like the British leaders, have had a policy of lockdown, which the evidence is now incontrovertible that lockdowns cost more lives than they save. You can't have lockdown after lockdown with the cases going up and cases going down again and again, and also all the damage you see in terms of the damage to people's freedoms and mental health, and as we're going to talk in the next hour about cancer deaths as well, as a result of basically having a national COVID service, not a national health service anymore. The fact that they are, it would appear, incapable of striking that balance of probabilities of risk on that issue. Well, of course they can't strike a balance of risk on the issue of blood clots and AstraZeneca.
I mean, just as an aside, to give you some idea of how much you should necessarily trust a scientist to completely impartially, my old man always tells a story about how the leading medic in his year at university was nicknamed Animal for his activities in the pub, which ought to give you some idea, I think, frankly, and that was the best guy. But something else, of course, that is perhaps slightly missed in all of this is that scientists, they give their opinions to politicians who ultimately make the decisions, but the politicians are listening to the advice and taking it sort of almost verbatim.
As gospel.
These people are not these people are not democratically accountable. We don't necessarily know entirely how they always end up being appointed to these committees, and that, I think, is a really concerning thing when, as you say, you consider that we're pursuing policies of lockdown. Italy is about to hit its third wave of the virus. There'll be further lockdowns there. And with decisions to sort of step back from taking the vaccines, that means that these lockdowns will be extended. They'll go on even longer to prevent people from dying because they're not making political decisions. Yeah. And there is a lack of oversight there that needs to be taken into account.
Absolutely. I'll just correct that, to prevent people from dying of COVID in the short run. I think those are the crucial caveats you have to add.